Well, good morning once again. Welcome to Unity Spiritual Center, and a shout out to our online community as well. Couldn't get that word out of my mouth this morning. So this morning, we are beginning on our summer series for 2018. It's called Metaphysics in the Movies. It's an exploration of the spiritual truths and nuggets that are in some of our favorite films and some of our not-so-favorite films, because over these next 2 months, we're going to explore a smorgasbord of film. We're going to see a video clip or two each week and identify a critical nugget of wisdom that is spoken to from the film clip and the characters in each story. And of course, you will also learn about one or more of our 5 unity principles and how it shows up in this film, as well as which of the 12 powers empowers the characters that we're exploring that week. For those of you who have not yet heard of the 12 powers come from the teachings of Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity. And if you want a refresher, please see our website and go to our YouTube channel to see the summer series for 2017, where we explored all 12 of those 12 powers, one each week. And if that's not enough, you get to join the speaker on Monday evenings for explorations, where we have an open dialogue about the topic of the Sunday message. So I was first exposed to the Lord of the Rings trilogy back in my early 20s in a book, not a movie, a book, like paper pages. And at that time, as well as when I saw these movies just recently made, I struggled with the center movie, The Two Towers. I wasn't getting into the war and destruction of Middle-earth. I wasn't able to recognize the divine presence in the character Saruman. How many of you have seen these movies? Many of you, good. And so I couldn't see the divine spark in Saruman, even though I know my Unity teachings tells me it's there. Because that ego-based white wizard represents greed and power, and the pursuit of that power was at the loss of multiple life. Power at any cost. I struggled watching his army of orcs being manufactured and beaten and made to be angry, killers, hateful, and yet still loyal to their master. Unfortunately, it's just like many natural, loving, and loyal animals who are bred and trained by humans to be killers, to fight to the death, just as these orcs were trained. I couldn't stomach it. It's inhumane, and I found the cruelty was just incomprehensible. And yet, in this same film, the one I chose to talk about shares this transformational story that inspires me. So in the same film, I was appalled, and yet I was inspired, not by the same characters, mind you, but all of it came to life. And the character who inspired me so is this one here, Gandalf the Gray. Gandalf is a humble, gentle old wizard. He's one of the 5 Istar divine beings or wizards that were sent to Middle-earth by Valar in the Third Age. All of these movies have a language and history all to their own, and so I won't go into depth because it's like reading the so-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so in the Bible. And so Gandalf was a friend to the hobbits, and he travels back to the Shire to celebrate the 111th birthday of his friend Bilbo Baggins. And upon arrival, he recognizes that this old friend has not aged a day. Very suspicious. And so during this visit, the party went on, and he realized that Bilbo had one of the magic rings. And so on confronting Bilbo, he had the ring in his own hand. And yet when he held the ring for just an instant, he saw the eye of the Lord, the dark Lord of all beings. He saw the fires of Mordor from which this ring had come, and he dropped it. Knowing that this vision was terrible, he ran off to the archives and the library. I love the library. It's got books everywhere. It's my kind of place. Knowing he had to find this truth of this story that he knew but had since forgotten, he went to research and remember. And so he used the attribute of wisdom, which is the ability to judge, evaluate, discern, and appraise, and then apply what is known. We each have this attribute of wisdom. It is called one of the 12 gifts of God. And Gandalf applies his study to his experience, and he goes back to the Shire to test the energy of the ring. And using the attribute of wisdom within him, he stands firm in the conversations of what must be done to this ring, and it must be removed from the Shire. And so the hobbits prepare to depart on what will become a journey of a lifetime. For each of us, there is something we try to avoid on our personal journey. I see you're all thinking about what that is for yourself. There is something we dread, something we fear, but we know we must do. Many times, this thing that we face with trepidation is our greatest lesson. The one which, once we experience this, we step over the threshold and claim our greatest power. We step into who it is we have come here on this planet at this time in history to be. And once we have crossed that threshold, we step in and our soul expresses a higher truth that we ever thought possible from this human shell. For Gandalf, the place he dreaded and tried hard to avoid was going deep beneath the surface of the earth and into the mines. Because it was prophesied that he would ultimately perish there. He knew this. And so for each of us, we too avoid and fear looking into the depth of our own mind, into the subconscious where the beasts and the shadows lay. We fear our own shadow self. In our previous talk series based on the book Birthing a Greater Reality, that is exactly what the author encouraged us to do, to take a look at the shadow self, to embrace all of the ideas that we had about that shadow self, and to learn to love it. By loving our imperfections, our failures, and the stupidity of ourselves, we embrace the shadow. But we must grow through and cross that threshold by ourselves. Gandalf, knowing what sleeps in the darkness, knowing that that darkness had been awoken deep in the recesses of the mines below Middle-earth, by the mere sounds and smells of his fellow travelers, it was only a matter of time. And so Gandalf calls upon the indwelling attribute of power, standing to face his fear and to face this demon. He speaks directly to this manifestation of fear that he has created in his life experience and says, "The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. You go back to the shadow. You cannot pass."
You cannot pass!
Gandalf!
I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun! Go back to the shadow. Shall not pass! You fools!
Using the attribute of power, which is the ability to master, dominate, and control base senses, thoughts, feelings, and belief, Gandalf was able to demand that fire demon not move beyond him to reach his fellow travelers. So he called upon the power to control his own ego-based fear and to stand in his power to fight not only his own mental and emotions, but to fight that demon. For the success of those making this journey, the Fellowship of the Ring, the collaboration of all the peoples of Middle-earth depended on success. He put the good of the group, the survival of all sentient life in Middle-earth before his very own. He sacrificed himself. Gandalf falling into the darkness, we see that the battle between Gandalf and the Balrog, fighting for days and days as they fell through fire and water and finally land on a snowy peak. Gandalf the Gray has faced the fire demon and came out the victor. Losing consciousness, the ego died to itself of mortal wounds. Later, in the old forest, the remaining members of the Fellowship sense the presence of the White Wizard. fearing that it is Saruman, the ego-based white wizard who represents greed and power, they are ready for battle.
Orc blood.
These are strange tracks.
The air is so close in here.
This forest is old. Very old. Full of memory. And anger. The trees are speaking to each other.
Gimli, lower your axe.
They have feelings, my friend. The elves began it. Waking up the trees. Teaching them to speak.
Talking trees. What do trees have to talk about, except the consistency of squirrel droppings?
Aragorn nad no ennas.
Uncanny.
The white wizard approaches.
Do not let him speak. He will put a spell on us. We must be quick.
You are tracking the footsteps of two young hobbits.
Where are they?
They passed this way the day before yesterday. They met someone they did not expect. Does that comfort you?
Who are you? Show yourself! It cannot be.
Forgive me. I mistook you for Saruman.
I am Saruman. Rather Saruman as he should have been.
You fell.
Through fire and water. From the lowest dungeon to the highest peak, I fought in the Balrog of Morgoth. Until at last I threw down my enemy and smote his ruin upon the mountainside. Darkness took me, and I strayed out of thought and time. Stars wheeled overhead, and every day was as long as a life age of the earth. But it was not the end. I felt life in me again. I've been sent back until my task is done. Gandalf? Yes. That was what they used to call me. Gandalf the Gray. That was my name. Gandalf. I am Gandalf the White. And I come back to you now. At the turn of the tide.
So Gandalf had passed through death to become Gandalf the White. When Gandalf remained true to his quest, he defeated the manifestation of his ego. He was transformed, and he returned to life even more powerful. Gandalf remains Gandalf, but a better Gandalf, more in alignment with the nature of creation and the whole world. He has evolved beyond the shadow of fear and transformed into a higher expression of being. The underlying message is that fighting against the true nature only gives you temporary victory, which is an illusion at best. Gandalf the White was resurrected by none other than Eru himself as a heavenly being. In the book of Luke, Jesus also predicted his death, just as Gandalf knew that once he went into the mines, he would surely die. And in Luke chapter 9, verses 28 and 29, it says, about 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him up to the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Meaning that when Jesus connected with his indwelling divinity through prayer, he connected with his power, his divine power, known as the Christ light. Even Siddhartha, who was described as radiant when he awakened to the divine consciousness that we know as the Buddha. Unity principle number 2 says that all beings have divinity within them. So to me, Gandalf seems as like he's someone who knows both his strengths and his limitations. And his encounter with his fear and the fire demon cost him his lower ego. Gandalf the Gray had to pass through that challenge of his life experience to acquire the wisdom, the strength, and the power to reveal himself and his true nature, his divine nature, to the world as Gandalf the White. Gandalf the White is more powerful, centered, and confident. He knows that he is a divine being, and he lives it. And as Gandalf the White, knowing that he is a divine being, he exhibits more power and strength and a calm presence of wisdom in his experience. These are all attributes that you and I possess as well. Use them wisely on your journey. Namaste.